Hi guys, welcome back to the next video in our Excel tutorial question demonstration series. In this video, we're going to be having a look at question 3 in the week 4 tutorial. So let's have a go. All right. So in this question, we're going to be comparing the property price across our different Perth suburbs, right? So what we would expect, and if we just look at house prices in Brisbane, there's a lot of variation in the price depending on where exactly a property is, right? So we would expect for our Perth housing data set that this isn't going to be very different, right? So let's have a go at this. Let's have a look at this Perth housing data set and have a look at these prices. So we're going to go over into our data set and we're going to select two columns, the suburb and the price. And then we're going to select that from the top to the bottom. And we're going to put these over in question 3. Right, don't need to do any filtering. There's full observations for both of these. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is this question is asking us to have a look at the average house price by suburb. And in particular, use that to create a bar chart, right? So the first thing we're going to have to do is actually calculate the average price by suburb. So the quickest way to do this is to use a pivot table, right? A pivot table allows us to put in our categorical variable here and then calculate its average price. So we're going to select this data here, go up into Insert, and then select Pivot Table, Existing Worksheet, and just put it somewhere on a sheet like this, right? We want to put our suburb variable into our rows, and then our price variable into our values. And we'll notice that it's going to default to giving us the sum. The sum is not what we're after the average. So we can go into here and hit value field settings, or we can click on the values here in our table, right click on it, go down to summarize values as, or by rather, and then select the statistic we're after. So in this case, we're after the average. Okay. The other thing we'll notice is there's a lot of variation in the average price across our suburbs. Something that looks nice in a bar graph is ranking our categories that we want to show in our bar graph from least to most or from most to least, right? Basically just organizing it in that kind of way, right? This basically just makes the bar graph a little bit more pleasant to look at and easier to get an understanding of how our suburbs compare in price to one another. Anything that makes it easier for the user or for our audience that's actually looking at the chart to make this comparison is going to improve the quality of the visualization. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our pivot table, right click, go down here to sort, and then sort smallest to largest or largest to smallest. I'll just go smallest to largest. Okay. Next, we're going to click on our table, go up here into Pivot Table Analyze. I'll hide this real quick. Go up here into Pivot Table Analyze, go over to Pivot Chart, and it'll be this default option usually, right? This looks like the kind of visualization we're after. Okay. Just like the last question we had a look at, let's get rid of some of these unnecessary elements. So we don't need a legend, and we don't need these buttons here, right? Now let's have a go at adding in now the elements we need. So we're going to need axis titles, and let's change this title. This is the average house price by suburb. This appended bit that we put at the end, this by suburb, usually when you're making some type of bar graph, using the words by and then the category that you're going to show along your x-axis allows you to very succinctly communicate what is going along, like what the different categories are that you want to visualize. So Something else that we can add here, this is the average Perth house price by suburb, so giving a little bit more information about our sample as well. Let's specify our axes here. So I'm going to put in suburb. You could argue that maybe this is superfluous, right? Clearly, if we're already indicating in our title that this is a suburb, maybe we don't need it here in the x-axis. Could go either way, right? In terms of which one's more appropriate. Let's add in our y-axis title. This is going to be our house price, or rather, not just that, the average house price. This has got a unit, it's dollars, so we need to specify it. Okay. Something else we might notice is this is a little bit of an annoying scale, right? These are quite large numbers. It might be more useful if instead of dealing with such large numbers, we were dealing with smaller numbers and then indicating the kind of scale that they were on, right? So if we could just say that these numbers were, say, in hundreds of thousands, then we wouldn't have as many zeros being displayed. So let's click on this axis, right click on it, and go down to Format Axis. On the right-hand side here, we're going to change the units that this is being displayed in to hundreds of thousands. All right? And now we can see that these values here are getting shown in hundreds of thousands. We could leave this as a multiplier, or instead, in the units that we're specifying for our axis title, we could indicate the number of zeros that we need to interpret it. So just an apostrophe and then the number of zeros, right? And then we can get rid of that multiplier, right? Now it's pretty clear what we're looking at. Okay, so we're basically finished making our visualization. We could play around with different elements here. Maybe we could click on these bars, right click on it. Maybe we could add in some data labels, make it a little bit clearer what these prices are. Playing around with them, we could also format these data labels, play around with where they are in terms of our label position, maybe change them to show a different number of zeros, right? Might not be entirely necessary to show the exact price here. Depends on the context that this chart exists in. Something else we could play around with is the color of these bars. When we click on them, right click on them, we can change the fill color and we can change it to change the color that we want to display. Okay. And when we're making our dashboard a little bit later on, playing around with the colors, making things a little bit clearer and consistent between visualizations can really help the user and help your audience. Okay. We don't just have to play around with the fill, we could also play around with the outline. So maybe we want to give these a black outline here, make them a little bit more definite. This black outline as well, we can actually make that outline a little bit stronger, increase the weight, right? Or a little bit lighter. Okay. Or we can make them change the pattern of this layout here, depending on what exactly it is that we want to show. All right. All right, so let's answer the question, which suburb is most expensive, which is most affordable? Okay. It looks as though Applecross is most expensive, right? We want to be a little bit careful here, right? Because we might not be comparing apples to apples if we just roughly compare the price of a house in Applecross to the price in Alfred Cove or Alexander Heights. Maybe Applecross could be half incredibly expensive houses, and then the other half of the suburb might be more standard like residential areas, right? Where I live in like North Brisbane, right? Like for example, I live somewhat close to Bridgeman Downs, right? And Bridgeman Downs has these incredibly large estates, right? They're incredibly expensive properties. But in some sections of Bridgman Downs, you have houses that are comparable to what you would find in Castledine, Bald Hills, Strathpine, right? So Applecross or Alfred Cove, for that matter, might just be skewed by a few expensive houses. So we don't want to overstate which of these suburbs is more expensive. We might need to look in more detail to see how these houses compare uh, across the different suburbs. Okay. All right. So we will like leave it there, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.